questions, we would love to have them join us. So feel free to reach out to any of us and can participate in more sessions like this. So thanks everyone. If you have questions throughout the presentation, I'll be monitoring the chat box as well, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So welcome to input either to all the panelists or to just me if any questions that you have during the presentation. Everyone is defaulted on mute at the moment, but you can raise your hand during that session if you have a question and you want to ask it live, or you can type it in the chat. So whatever's easiest for you. Thanks to all the behind the scene folks who helped get this organized. Allie and Brenda, thanks for all your help. So I just wanted to give you a shout out. Barbara and Bev for helping us test out this new Zoom webinar mode that we're doing here. So thanks everyone for your help. And without further ado, I'll kick it off to Julie to go ahead and get started and introduce the moderators today.
All right, well, thanks everybody for coming, and thanks to the fellas for being here. And we're going to be talking about women and mission critical and these ideas, and from a guy's perspective, actually. And you all are leaders in the industry, and we're chosen for that reason. And I'm sure you're going to have a lot of great ideas today, and the audience is going to want to chime in as well. So let's kick it off. I thought what we could do, I'll introduce myself here, and then I'm going to kick off the first question. And I'm going to do a round robin here, where I'm going to have each of you answer the same question from your perspective. And as you do that, if you could introduce yourself first and then answer the question, it'd be great. Sound good? All right, great. Let's do this. So, oh, by the way, I'm a digital sociologist. I work at the University of Southern California. I also teach courses there on sustainable infrastructure. We just kicked off today. I sit on the board of Infrastructure Masons, and I wrote a book called Left to Their Own Devices: How Digital Natives Are Reshaping the American Dream. And I'm working on my next book, which is going to take a more global look at digital connectivity and data centers and whatnot, and it's going to be called The Cloud Machine. So I'm working on that now. It's going to be a lot of fun. So I'll probably be reaching out to some of you all to give some thoughts and stories on that. Everything from outages to architecture and design to where you see things going as we move forward into the future. So super excited to be here, and very important conversation. One of the big thrusts that we have at Infrastructure Masons is diversity and inclusion. And as we know, you all know, I don't have to even say this, but I will, you know, the industry really lacks a lot of women, and that's really our focus today. And the women I've met in the industry are fantastic. So, you know, how do we do more of that? And that's really what we're going to be thinking about today. So one of the ideas, and by the way, I've taught courses on gender and sociology. I'm a sociologist by trade. And there's a lot of different thinking about women in the workforce. And so let me kind of preface our first question here. It's been suggested that sports paves the way into the workforce. And if you think about organized sports like football or baseball or basketball, things that a lot of young men have taken part in for many years, they are organized hierarchically. There's a team captain, right? You work together toward a goal. That kind of mimics what you do in the corporate world in many ways. And a lot of young men have gone through the sports system, women too, but not as many in these kinds of organized structures. So I wanted to ask each of you to respond to this idea that as we get into the workforce, it seems like men are better sometimes at helping other men or mentoring or reaching out or working together. And women sometimes suffer from what I like to call a queen bee syndrome. You know, once they've moved up the ladder, they're not necessarily helping other women as much. And some women are fabulous at that, and others are more like the queen bee, where there's only one queen bee in a hive kind of thing. So what can the women and what can we all learn from men in terms of helping others, in terms of mentoring, to help people sort of move up that job ladder as you all have done? What do you think we can learn from women can learn from men in that regard? And who'd like to kick us off today?
Happy to.
Go for it.
Great. So, Chris, why don't you introduce yourself? I know you need no introduction. None of you do, but just to be just in case there's that one straggler that doesn't know your guys' wonderful personalities, you can take a second, introduce yourself, and then address that question. Thanks.
Sure. So Chris Crosby, I'm the CEO for Compass Data Centers. It's an interesting question. It's something I talk quite a bit about with Nancy, who I believe you know, Nancy Novak, who's our Chief Innovation Officer. And
love her.
I really view, the concept of the boys club inside of an organization. Ultimately, it's about trust, and bias can be a dangerous thing, but self-aware bias, I think, is the most powerful thing for any business. And I think as I look with women in the workforce, and what I encourage Nancy and her peers and different folks to do is a lot of times those things that get done that you feel like you're kind of on the outside looking in, the women need to create that girls club. There is real value in having shared experiences and having trust over shared experiences. Relationships are built over a long period of time, and seemingly biased things have more to do with trust most of the time in the workplace. Putting the chauvinistic or the misogynist aside, which obviously they exist, but that's not the core of folks. I don't believe, and I do think that trust and having the ability to talk about shared experiences, have those relationships. I really encourage that with the women inside of our organization and those that they relate to with their peers.
That's really great, Chris. And let's come back to that shared experiences idea, because I think there's really something to that to be said. And the word trust, which is huge, as you know. Those are two really key cornerstone pieces. Eli, Rich, would one of you two like to take that? What can women learn from the fellas in terms of helping other women succeed, in terms of sort of emulating some of the things that maybe the guys have done for years in the workforce? What do you think? And take a moment to introduce yourselves too.
Yeah, so I'll go, Rich. So I'm Eli with Holder Construction. I have much of my career worked in mission critical projects, in a lot in Phoenix, but in Chicago and in the Northeast. Interesting. I had to kind of absorb what you shared there, because I hadn't really heard or thought about that in the past. But I think similar to teams, there's also a camaraderie and a kind of a credibility that occurs with the trade workforce as well. So if you kind of draw a line or a similarity between what you refer to as a football team, for example, maybe a concrete formwork crew is very similar in that sense. And so I hadn't thought about that, but I do think that that there are certain things you learn about doing the starting role and moving up and credibility and lifting each other up and those type of things that that I could see being missed in people who don't partake in that. And so I agree with Chris in the sense that the trust piece and the balancing each other out and all of those things, I could see how that relates to a career. And I find that interesting. I also think that there are king bees, I would say. So I like what you said from a queen bee perspective, and I do think that the difference between a queen bee and others may be a confidence thing. And so I would be curious I'm sure that'll come up again to talk about.
That's a really good point, because, my mentor, by the way, I didn't mention, is the CTO of Chevron. And when you talk about confidence, I've co-taught with him and the CTO of Northrop Grumman at USC. And they're so confident, they don't have to prove anything to anybody, and so there isn't any of that sort of blustering around and trying to one up somebody. they've already done all the things that they need to do to make it in their careers. So I think there's something about that, and maybe we can kind of bring that in too, that word confidence. That's a really interesting idea that, maybe some of that, I'm recalling another professor that retired at USC, and when they were sort of feting her and saying our goodbyes, we had a party, and they said, there's two kinds of stars in the world. There's those that, step on other people to push themselves up. And then there's the kind that brings everybody up with them, and that second kind, you have to have that confidence. Otherwise, it's just me and you're knocking everybody else down. So that's a great point. And let's circle back to that too. Thank you, Eli. Rich, you want to take that, introduce yourself and take that question, what can the women learn from, maybe things that the fellows have been doing for quite some time in the workforce and sports or elsewhere to make it up the ladder as you all have done so well.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So Rich Ryer, and thanks for having me today. I'm Senior Director for PayPal, and I lead our Global Data Center Services team. It's an interesting question and something that honestly I've thought a lot about over the past couple of years. Just 20 years in the business myself. I haven't seen really a material shift in women coming into the field, and I would say mission critical specifically, working from a smart hands and or critical facilities like engineering role. We've started to see some of that recently. I think it's and I'll tell you, the women that I get to work with in the industry are just super articulate, well respected and admired for their knowledge and expertise. But it's I think it takes a special type of person too, in our industry, one that really wants to be heard, to have a voice at the table, not afraid to raise their hand and add their thoughts on a given subject or on whatever it is. I think in the past there's always been a thought that to be successful in our space, you're lifting sometimes several 100-pound servers and moving racks, and it's a man's job. But we found that women absolutely are successful and can do the same job successfully, with no issues. So I'm excited to see the women that are in the industry today, and are awesome employees. And I've had a focus to try and specifically go after qualified candidates, but women in general, to try and turn that. So I hope that helps.
Hey, Julie, if I could go back to your team concept on sports, like to poke at that a little bit, because it's something that I know we've talked about in our family, and my daughter's in engineering school now at University of Texas, and
Neat.
I think it has more to do with competitive things. So my wife was a competitive singer, for example, or maybe it was dance, or it was I think maybe you were in Olympics of the mind, or I think it has more to do with being in competitive environments for success in business, as opposed to necessarily it being sports oriented. I do think that there is significant advantage for children and teens that understand that, the forced humility of, wow, there's always somebody better than me. The forced humility of, wait, I'm better at this role than I am at that role. Just those competitive things, I think when those are learned, and it doesn't have to just be sports. Sports is an easy example, but anybody that's in those types of environments, I think they tend to have more success moving up the ladder in the business sense.
So sort of that competitive nature bred into them with, be it not necessarily organized sports, but as you said, singing or whatever the aspect might be, that's the core of it, is the competitive nature. So interesting. So let's take the next step here. We've got some great themes going here. I'm really thinking about this. idea of confidence and camaraderie and trust. Those are really important. What do you think, Rich? I want to kind of ping back, if you wouldn't mind, on what you just said, because I think you really identified something that's happening. And you said that you haven't really seen, let's call it, the needle moving toward, let's say, gender equity between men and women, moving more toward that 50-50 mark, let's say. You haven't seen that needle moving that much in the last 20 years. What do you think, and that you're taking an effort and others are taking effort, what do you think it's going to take? How do we disrupt that? How do we bring in more, young women, for example, into these fields? You guys, like I said, I think you guys are phenomenal. And I told my brother what wonderful people you are in this industry, and it's just so great. How do we get more young folks excited and interested, and particularly young women? What do you think is going to disrupt that? Can we start with you, Rich, on that?
Sure, Julie. I believe diversity has to start at the top. So it's building, an inclusive and culturally diverse workforce, and it requires consistent dedication, short and long-term investment, and strategic focus. I share how important diversity is from a PayPal lens in our culture. Diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice. That's one of our CEO's favorite quotes. And it's something that we as a business think perfectly encapsulates, where we are as a society and the challenges facing all of us.
That's really, really, really great. Eli, do you have any thoughts on that? Thanks, Rich. I want to come back to that, because I really think that idea of diversity is a fact and inclusion is a choice is really on the nose, and if you have that strategic focus, like you said, it's not an accident, you've got that strategy toward doing that. I think that's a key. What do you think, Eli? I mean, I don't know how long you've been in this industry, and you're more toward the construction side. Is that what I take? What do you think it's going to take to move the needle? I've met the Nancy Novaks and the folks
Sure.
that do some of this work. What do you think it's going to take to move the needle in the direction towards more inclusion of young women in the industry?
Sure. I think, one thing that comes to mind for me is I do recruiting at universities. And, if we were to hire one of every 5 people that came through of both genders, we'd still end up with a significantly larger, male hiring trend than female. And so from a candidate perspective, not to take anything away from what Rich said, because he hit the nail on the head from a organization, a leadership perspective, the mentality of the organization has to force that equity that you referred to. But at the recruiting level, the demographics of the engineering schools, and Chris, that's awesome that your daughter is in engineering school. But generally speaking, it's still more male dominated in engineering and construction management in particular. I think it's maybe harder in some cases for the leap to construction management than it is maybe architecture, engineering, that field. And so one thing I do is I always take, I don't know if she's on, but I always take female representation to the recruiting fairs. And I think it's a good way for them to connect as well, that maybe in a way that I couldn't. And so we are focused on diversity from all fronts at Holder, including when we recruit at the collegiate level. And lately, I will say we've had a lot of success and good stories with female hires and longevity of employment and the success that they've brought to our company.
I'm really glad you brought that up about the representation. I want to tell you something. I did a little poll of my students this last semester at USC, and we were talking about perks and what would attract them into a job and what wouldn't, and things. We're kind of thinking outside the box about sort of the new digital employee kind of person. And they said younger groups, by the way, happen to be more racially, ethnically diverse than, let's say, baby boomers. So that's another factor. And they said, to both Rich and Eli's points here, if I don't see, they go, I go on the website. If I don't see in the board of directors or in the upper management, if I don't see any faces that look like mine, quote unquote, then I just don't even bother to apply, because it's like, well, I guess that's not for me. So, for all of us listening, I think that's an important message that from yourself and from my students. If they don't see faces like theirs, they don't think that they're welcome, or maybe they wouldn't be a good culture fit, however you want to think about that. So that idea of representation, not only in person, but even on the websites and all, is what they're looking for now. So really important, subtle, but I think that's an important point, and something that all of our audience can really integrate into their practices. So thank you for bringing that up. So let's take a look at this idea of confidence that you brought up, Eli. How might we build that confidence? You've got a young person coming in from college, and maybe they're uncertain, and there's some studies that show that women want to feel 120%, that they've got it, and men will take a little bit more risk in that area. Maybe they don't totally have it under control yet, but they're willing to be a little bit more risk-taking in some ways, as opposed to women. So how, if we're getting young women and we know that that's a factor, how might we build up that confidence as the prepared professional that you all are? And how did you maybe get there as well in that sense? One of you want to jump in and take
If
us
you don't
down?
mind, since I made the confidence comment and you jumped
Yeah.
right to it, something that kind of hit with me. So a senior leader within our company had talked about diversity and specifically related to female representation. And the one thing that she said that stuck with me is that, and you probably have the stats, Julie, so you can feel free to correct me when I say it wrong, is that in order to take a risk in a business environment, women feel they need to check all 10 boxes if there's 10, specific criteria. Men will take the same risk if they can check 4 of the 10 boxes. And so I think if that's true, or if research has proven that that is relatively accurate, then a few things we can do is, one is help them check additional boxes. For example, if they say, I don't think I checked box 5, and we say, well, what is it? And you help them either gain the criteria or work with them to feel more confident that they do check the box, when in fact they may be overly self-critical. And also just trying to, I guess, embrace an environment where failure is acceptable and isn't a detriment to their career and things like that, if they do take a risk and it turns out to be not exactly as it was planned.
That is really interesting. That's exactly what I was thinking of when you said that. So thanks for outlining that. And in fact, when you talk about checking those boxes, not only once they've gotten into your workplace, but even before that, when they're trying to apply for your jobs, that if they don't tick enough boxes, a guy will take, well, I'll take a shot at that job, and a woman will hold back. The women will hold back on taking the shot because they don't tick all 10 boxes, as you said. So I think that's really, really interesting. Another point related to that I just want to make mention of here, because it seems relevant, is that there's been some new research coming out that says that even the way you frame the job description can be gendered. And so, for example, aggressive individual, we're seeking an aggressive individual. A lot of women, they go, well, I'm an assertive individual, but aggressive, it sounds very masculine. So even from the get-go, we might not realize that. Rich, you talked about and Eli, you talked about the biases that are sort of built in, and Chris as well. But we can even bias from before they've even stepped through the door to sort of turn people away, almost subconsciously. Oh, well, I guess they're looking for a guy, and that's not me, where they'd be a fantastic candidate for that job. So I think we all need to think about even how we're presenting that job might be turning people away that we don't intend to. So that's great. Chris, Rich, do you want to address that idea about how you became confident, or how to build confidence in a younger workforce? I'm sure you guys have done workforce development for people sort of moving up the chain. Do you have any thoughts on that for for others in the audience that are developing their workforce of young women coming in?
Julie, I mean, I'll take it first. So I think
Great.
about just from a confidence perspective, you know, and women that I have on my staff, and it's not just the women, it's the men too, but really important for them to be pushed out of their comfort zone and to go out into the industry and look for opportunities to speak and to be heard, to be seen as a subject matter expert within our industry. I think equally it's important that as leaders, we provide opportunities for visibility, and you know, within and outside of our organization. You know, talk about checking boxes. Whenever I bring someone up for promotion, and it's no different. It's the same for men and women. It's checking those boxes. Do they have that visibility? Do the other leaders or my peers know who they are and can speak to them and say, I agree that this person deserves to be promoted above, you know, someone else.
That is great advice, Rich. And I think it's something that, you know, the audience here can really take to heart, is helping to build the visibility. And when you talk about public speaking, I don't know if you know this or not, but the number one fear in the United States is public speaking. Number two is dying. So it kind of gives you a perspective. But, you know, that's a very important skill in that visibility. And, you know, maybe part of that development is sending, you know, young folks to Toastmasters, you know, where they can gain some confidence in that speaking. If that idea of the visibility is very important, and as you said, being recognized by others in your organization and outside, that they gain those skills, and that's one way to do it. And frankly, a lot of the kids now, that's one of the things I explored in my book, they don't have as much with the face-to-face experience. My students called up, I had them call a guy from a major car company to frame up a semester project, and I talked to the guy for about half hour. It's real funny. And I said, hey, give this guy a call, figure out a semester project. At the end, they're going to pitch it back to him. This is a major car company. You would know the name in 5 seconds. And great. Next week, I come to class. I go, how'd the call go? Not very good. What happened? There was an awkward silence. What awkward silence? So they called this guy on the phone and just sat there and said nothing. And these are master's level psychology students, for God's sake. So, you know, I mean, the thing is, it's not that they're dumb or something. They don't have the experience because they text everything. So the calls, the face-to-face, and the speaking, they're just simply less experienced than prior generations at all. So we may need to kind of 101 that a little bit more and build up some of those kinds of skills, to your point. So I think that's something else that surprised me. So I think some of your audience might not realize that because they're so digitally immersed, that they may be missing some of those very important skills to moving up. So thanks for bringing those up. Chris, do you have any thoughts on finally on that confidence thought, or building up that young worker that's going up? Mm-hmm.
Two things. One, was blessed to start it out in telecom where we didn't have any of this garbage. There was no gender issues and diversity issues, and everybody kind of, you know, it was all just part of that business. Getting into the world of construction, and specifically into the IT infrastructure data center side of things, right? There's this dearth of diversity. But I think there's two things that you have to look at. One is on the senior roles, and the other is on the junior roles. On the senior roles, you just got to recognize that the prove it mentality is in play, and you have to acknowledge that as a leader. You have, hey, look, you're in this job already. I don't need you to prove anything. Tell me what you think. And you have to be very intentional in reinforcing that over and over again. Otherwise, that confidence will not build. Because if you've been passed over so many times, if you feel like you've always had to prove yourself, if you're always dismissed, you know, and that's been trained in your behavior, you need someone as a leader to retrain you. And so that's for the senior roles. Now, for the junior roles, you have to be very intentional. You have to create junior roles that take advantage of female skill set. I'll give you an example. Every construction manager at Compass Data Centers that's a junior construction manager is a woman. Why? Well, their storytelling ability of what goes on the job site, their observational skills, their ability to note what's going on in a construction trailer meeting is so much superior to what any man can give me from a business perspective. Because by nature, on a natural, if we use Pareto principle, 80-20 rule or whatever, 80% of women are going to be better at that than 80% of the men, right? It's not a constant rule, but it is a truth about the gender delta. Well, that's a huge business value. Well, if you create those roles and you do value that, and by the way, that also means if you're going to put women on the job site, boy, you better have really clean restrooms. You better not allow graffiti all over the place. You don't tolerate certain things. You have to be very intentional in what you're doing. And when you do that, and when you create business opportunities, and we look at it as our feeder system. So yeah, they purposefully don't have experience. To the comment about, are they in a construction management degree? Well, no, who would do that? Why would I want to be in a room with, 100 guys? I don't want to be in that class. I'm over in this class. But we can use their skill sets and then grow them into those roles. And so that intentionality with junior roles is incredibly important.
I think that's so well said. I mean, that's a whole thesis in itself. That's a whole book in itself right there, I think, what you just talked about. That's really interesting. And let's get into that a little bit more about leadership qualities. What are those leadership qualities? Let's hear from Rich and Eli at this point, and then we'll circle back to Chris. What qualities do you think are important in a leader in your organization, and what do you look for?
I'll add, I'll back it up first. So I think at the junior level, since Chris brought up kind of that analogy, the junior level is so technical in terms of its evaluation that if you can achieve the tasks, you are moving up the specific ranks that are defined by the organization you're within. And so if you're, Chris used some examples of the early responsibilities on the construction side of doing things related to project documentation and things like that. If you're doing those roles, then you're achieving what you set out to accomplish. As you move up, they become more interpersonal and less technical. And then the evaluation criteria goes back to that. Is there confidence? Is there camaraderie? Are there those things? And so I've heard that that the difficulty or discomfort grows as you rank. If you don't feel like you fit in, or if you don't feel like you said, like your face is someone like you is on the board of directors type of mentality. But I would say when in any leader, regardless of gender, the one thing that I always feel is extremely important is empathy. I know it's cliche and very commonly noted, but the reality is if you haven't been there or can't put yourself in the shoes of the people that you're required to drive to greatness, then you can't, I guess, achieve realization of what they're going through and how to help them through it. And so I think in a world that is, I think you used the term aggressive earlier, but hard charging or self-starting or things that oftentimes get referenced in construction, but certainly mission critical construction, because it's always, you need it tomorrow, right? And so in that environment, if you don't have empathy while you're driving others, they won't follow you, they won't respect you.
That's a really great word. And to think about empathy, we often think about that as characteristics that a lot of women have. So to think of that as a key quality of leadership is really, really interesting. So exactly, I like that.
I didn't think, by the way, when I said that, you are right. Generally speaking, women are more empathetic, I believe. So it's actually a trait that is desired, or I think is extremely important, but also somewhat, I guess, more almost genetically in the code of females, I feel like.
Yeah, it's the idea that women, the research shows that women are better at reading body language. And Chris said about reading the room. I think that's a quality, as I think about my mentor has said, well, the body language was good. I mean, that's what he takes away when we walk out of a meeting together. And that's what he's doing. He's taking the temperature of the room, but that kind of sensibility, as Chris was saying, and telling the story about what's going on. So let me ask another question here that I think will be really critical for you all in particular because of who you are as men and as leaders in this industry. And let me start with Rich here. Rich, how have you been? I think it's important to have an ally. I've talked about my mentor. I think of it as the golden MBA. He's been sort of downloading into me the last 8 or 9 years, what he's learned as a C-level executive, one of the biggest companies in the world. And I've learned a lot through that. How have you been, and how can you as a leader to the world outside of your organization, but to all of us, how have you been an ally for women, and what can others learn in terms of how to be that ally for women in this industry?
Thanks, Julie. So I think about, a woman that's near and dear to me on my team. Just as an example, known her for, 10 plus years. So I was with eBay for over 10 years before I came to PayPal when we split in 2015, and she came over and as a part of my team. But just she's one of the most dedicated, hardworking individuals that I've ever met. She worked tirelessly to build an asset logistics and management program from the ground up, and she never asked for anything. Just so humble. I think her, we'll say her culture. So she's the breadwinner, her husband's retired, and she takes it on herself to just, I'll catch her sending emails at 1 o'clock in the morning. So just a work ethic that, is matched by few. And I recognize the value that she represents to PayPal and our customers and my team. And she's truly admired by everyone on my team as well, and on her team. But I do whatever I can to, and again, she doesn't ask for it, but we do whatever we can to support her career growth, sending her to, again, classes and getting additional certifications within her role, but then even outside of that to give her newer opportunities. And again, what I said before, kind of encouraging, pushing her, if you will, to go out and speak, and sending her to the Dale Carnegie class to go through that, and but just really supporting her because, again, she doesn't ask for anything, but just deserves that and more.
I love that. I'm reminded of what my mentor always says. He says, I'll take a great attitude over skills any day. He goes, you can develop skills, but you can't develop a great attitude, and that idea, that work ethic and that great attitude she has toward the team and towards really getting it done. It sounds amazing. Well, what about you, Chris? What have you done? Thank you guys so much. What have you done, Chris, to be an ally? I mean, there's so many things. Where do we begin? But can you kind of talk about that a little bit for the audience?
I think from a career perspective, just diversity just in general is a I mean, my God, who wants to have another Chris Crosby? This COVID thing, I apologize to everybody because I'd learned what I was like, by lockdown and isolation. So I just look at, we do a lot. We do, besides just gender diversity, obviously diversity of different backgrounds. We do disc profiles on personalities. Like we like to mix it up, and aligning people around a common culture and a common vision. I really believe that that's how you get the best of everything. Putting a bunch of like-minded folks in the room, you're going to get the same decisions, and that's not, that's never the best for our customers. It's never the best for our suppliers, our investors, whatever the case may be. So I think that as far as assisting, I look for three things in any any leader. I look for passion, I look for ability, and I look for humility. And when people come with humility, my gosh, and I like the word coaching rather than mentoring. I'd rather let them fail, and let them make a mistake, and let them learn from it. I tend to find that very successful people, if they're told what to do, they don't learn as much as if they're allowed to make their own mistake. And I call it the ditch. They can go in the ditch, and then we can talk about it again, and it has more meaning at that point. So,
I like
but
that.
in order to have that, you've got to have somebody. Yes, they have passion. Yes, they have ability, no matter what their background is. But they've got to have humility.
Those are three great qualities. Yeah. Any of you want to weigh in on any of that at this moment before we push on? All right. So when you talked about coaching and going into the ditch, and you said something very important, Chris, right before that, and you said having all the same type of person in the room, and that right there is the heart of it. I told you I worked with the former CTO of Northrop Grumman, and he had a diverse team. And he said, we always outperform the other teams. And that's what the research shows, that actually when you have, I'm sure you've seen this, but when you have more women in upper leadership positions and on the board, the companies actually do better at the bottom line. So this isn't simply a nice thing to do.
No,
This
it's
is
a business
actually a
thing.
good business decision. Exactly that. And he said to me, the reason is that other perspectives, let's say women or whatever the diversity is that we're looking at, they have different life experiences. He says engineering works, and many other things, upon analogy. And if you have more analogies to draw from, you're going to create novel and hence competitive, hence, engineering and other solutions. And that's the strength of having the other viewpoints at the table, as you mentioned, is being able to draw on a wider variety or array of analogies that you can then bring into design, into construction, into all these other things. So I think that's really great. So on that note, I'm going to bring it back over to Eli. What strengths do you believe that women can bring to an organization? And then let's take it over to the audience after we take a round on this one. What strengths do you believe women bring to an organization that you've seen anyway?
So I guess, first of all, I think the short answer is all of the same that any men in a leadership position can, but I think there are certain things that they bring that can be unique and set themselves apart. The experiences that I've had working with female leaders within Holder, I didn't say it earlier, but almost 100% of my career has been with Holder. I did have a short stint prior out of college. And so my experience in many cases has been, what is in our culture and in the women that we have that are leaders. And I will say the one person that comes to mind, and it kind of goes back to empathy to some extent again, but one female leader that I really admire, part of her role because of her strengths is things related to our, what we call Holder Gives, or our philanthropy efforts. And so all of our philanthropic efforts every year go through one senior leader that happens to be a female. She's also very involved in our brand and how we represent ourselves internally and externally. And I think that by example, those are some of the things that I've observed, that I think she is a really good filter for how we want to represent ourselves. And she's also a really good filter for how we can best help people. And so call it a coincidence, but as she's someone I admire in our industry, and specifically with Holder, I think those two things come to mind.
I'm really glad you brought that up about the philanthropy. When we're talking about diversity and the job pipeline thing, I've been thinking a lot about that with iMasons and education and pipelining them up into the careers. And a lot of young people now, there's been a shift in values generationally. And when you're looking at people that are in college or a little bit younger now, they want to make a difference in the world. And that's a very important quality to them. So again, when we think about attracting a young workforce, or attracting a diverse workforce, that's going to be a key quality. So being able to step forward with things like Holder Gives, I think is going to be very attractive for young people that are looking to not only do their job, but to make that greater difference in the world. So, kudos there, but also for the whole audience, I think that's something that they can pick up on. Rich, do you have any other thoughts on these ideas of the qualities or strengths that you believe that women might particularly bring to your organization that you might have noticed?
I think I mentioned them before, just as, with the example of Junlee and just her work ethic, just her strong dedication, work ethic, but also, they bring a difference of opinion. And I think, just tremendous drive. I've seen and deal with, multiple leaders respected in our organization, just very customer focused and driven. The collaboration too is huge. I have witnessed multiple times women within PayPal, that will, within a given meeting can herd the cats, if you will, and get everybody to focus and think about and make decisions and execute on a plan. Whereas, sometimes I've seen men struggle in the same context.
I have to comment on the one thing Rich said. I do agree.
Yeah.
It seems like the voice of reason oftentimes is a female voice in meetings that get off course, and so I echo that feeling.
Yeah, I mean, some of the studies have shown that women that are in leadership positions tend to be a little bit more collaborative, getting different opinions before making that final decision. And men tend to be a little bit more hierarchical. So there are some gender differences that sort of show up at the table, if you will. So Michelle, do you want to jump on the screen? I think we might have some questions or would like to
Julie,
get some questions from the...
Can I add one more piece there?
Of course you can.
So
Chris,
from the
we knew you were
standpoint,
going to add. We knew you were going to add one more piece, Chris. Come on.
Just on that front, what do they bring to the organization? I mean, so from a CEO perspective, I have 2 women on my board. If I want to really know what goes on in the boardroom, I've got a lot of testosterone and I have 2 women, and I can ask them, what happened there? Did I read that right? Did I not read that right? Same thing for my ELT, which Nancy is on, and then I do the same thing on the senior leadership team and our execs that are women. There is a better observational capability for women as a gender than there is of men as a gender. Men are already thinking about the next answer most of the time, just like I just did right here. They're already thinking about what they want to say next, and are they fully grasping everything that's going on? And I think that is it's an incredible benefit in the home, for families, and it's an incredible benefit in the business.
Yeah, and that's it. Why not play up everyone's strengths? I mean, that's the strength of diversity, is having those different qualities to bring to the table, and then strengthening the whole organization. So great. Michelle, do you want to ask our audience, or shall we ask our audience if they have? I mean, these guys have brought so much food for thought today. My head is spinning. I'm thinking, we could go on and on about so many of these themes, but I want to give the audience a chance to ping in. Does anyone have some questions that they want to bring up?
Yeah, definitely. We were having a little issues with the chat box in the beginning. I think we fixed those now, so you can use the chat or Q&A, whichever feature works better for you. The first one that came in for the panelists is just reflecting on your career path and how you got here. Do you think the same path is open to women? It's a 2-part question. Or are your female peers at the similar path that you are on now?
I can take
Sorry.
that.
Eli's on mute.
I was muted. I was going to say, I'll start because my path might be a little shorter, but so my evaluation within Holder is where I started and the role that I played and the things that I've done. There are many peers that I can use as examples within our organization that are above me or beside me. I think specifically I'll speak to Mission Critical as a company that, a large percentage of our work is data centers. We have multiple director level females that are focused on mission critical environment work, both in the pre-construction and MEP support and project management. And I think all of them, the one common thread I would say, not to credit their career path solely, but back to confidence again. I think those are individuals who I felt were very confident, taking chances, taking charge, proving credibility, as opposed to potentially cowering back if like someone in the trades was challenging that they didn't necessarily know what they were talking about. They're the ones that would have stood up, as opposed to going back to their corner. And so I think that there definitely is a chance, and are real examples of people that are in a similar role to me, and I credit confidence.
Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, I was, so how I got here, wow, it's been, and Eli, I think you were assuming that Chris and I are older than you, because you said you probably got a shorter path. So shame on you.
Higher ranking. It's a hierarchy thing. Male thing.
Right.
No, he meant older. He meant older. I agree.
No, but I think,
I didn't say it.
Great question. I look at, where my career has gone, and never thought I would be where I am today. Though there was a point in my career that I really started to focus and developed a stronger desire to be in more of a technology role. And I didn't let anything stand in the way. There were sidetrack opportunities, I think, all of which got me, or helped get me to where I am today. Tremendous learnings. I think one thing that I would share is it's really important as a leader that you're willing to do everything that you ask of your staff. Not so. And what I mean by that is, I remember a short stint in the hospitality industry. I was assistant director of engineering, and I had like 30, 40 engineers that they would dig ditches. I mean, literally dig ditches and dig up chilled water lines that would bust. And I was of the opinion that I'm down there in the ditches with them. I got just as muddy. I was building up the shoring. I was on the job and down in the hole until we figured it out and fixed it. So it just lead by example. Maybe that's the military in me, but that's what I felt has always kind of been my North Star and held me true.
That's awesome.
So I mean, on can you come here? Yes, you have to have a complete screw loose to go down this path. So I'm a wacko. Started out as a computer science guy, a member of scientific staff, and ended up in the CEO role and a couple of companies over. And I would say the consistent thing was having a partner in my wife who could deal with my craziness of starting new entrepreneurial ventures and what that impact was. So I don't wish it on anybody, but I definitely love going out and interacting with other entrepreneurs and helping them maybe not make it quite as bad of mistakes as I've made in the past. And so that's an enjoyable thing. I think the entrepreneurial side of things is its own disease. What do you guys call it in sociology circles? Hypomania or something along those lines. So it's its own world on itself.
I love that. That's a great question, audience member. Michelle, do we have another one?
Yeah, so I'm going to post a link here actually first for everyone. So I think this link to the panelists, but there was an article
Right.
posted in the chat box, which is from Matt, and he said it helps explain some gender gap reasons, and like it's a pretty good article. So if anyone wants to read that, I posted it in the chat.
Great.
Another question here, which I think is interesting. It's like you've talked a lot about empathy and how that's a great quality for women to have. Do you think it could be detrimental for any junior staff, and there needs to be a sort of balance between competitiveness and empathy? And how do you help them understand that balance?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a danger with empathy. Empathy can be very, very egotistical to take and say that you can understand how somebody else can feel. I mean, I save that for very, very, very close relationships. I think it's a very dangerous thing, and one of the sources of some of our issues that we have when you feel like that's going on in our country right now, I understand what's better for you, because I don't. I will tell you that the compassion side of things is powerful, of trying to understand the other side. I do worry about the word empathy just in general from where I sit. I do think it can be a detriment to people. When you tell somebody that you understand what they're thinking and how they feel, I think you're better off being curious about it and trying to understand it. I really love Brene Brown and her concept of the story that I'm telling myself. So in other words, hey, you said this, the story I'm telling myself is that you meant this, this, and this. It's very disarming, and it helps you get to a level of understanding between one another. But I do think, be careful about empathy out there.
And Chris, you said something I never would have thought of previously, but definitely a good point. I think the reason I find it so important is the act of trying is probably 99% of that battle, right? So I'll use the example of I had a difficult development conversation with an individual who had just come back from her maternity leave. So could I attempt to be empathetic, meaning could I do everything in my power to say I'm a father, I watched my wife, I can try to think more like you and understand where you're coming from. To me, that's empathy, as opposed to saying, oh, trust me, I've done this before, I've had children, you got this. And so it was a very difficult conversation because it was a performance-related discussion for someone who was also dealing with outside factors. And so if I avoided empathy altogether, I think that is the wrong thing to do. However, I will approach it differently based on what you said, because I totally agree that I'll never be able to understand what she was going through, but I have to care and attempt to. And then kind of back to the outset of the question, one of the things when I've had conversations with women in the industry is to, many of them will say, don't use, the baby gloves when you give me a development conversation, don't try to sugarcoat things. Don't treat me, with a little softer hand. And so I think it is important from that perspective that being empathetic and caring is different than, supplementing for performance with it's okay, I understand, you'll be fine. You have to have the tough conversations as well.
Hey, by the way, I think we have a question that relates. You brought up this idea of motherhood, fatherhood. I think we have a question coming in from the audience on that. And I want to also say, related to this, my students said, hey, if we're going to be equal, then why don't we have equal amounts of time off after having a baby for men and women, if that's how we want to see? And I was like, wow, so that's kind of their thinking on that. But there's a question, Michelle, do you want to bring that out about, I'm a new father, I think I saw, and maybe we could bring that out. As a fairly new father, Matthew said, you want to kind of bring that to the panelists?
Yeah, that was tied to the article that he shared as well. But yeah, Matt,
You want to kind of summarize that?
leave, so 4 weeks of
I think that it addresses one of those pieces of what happens if a woman takes some time off to go be with a child for, prolonged period, whether it's years or whatever, then there tends to be, when they re-enter back into the workforce, there tends to be a gap, right? And that's one of the reasons why people at the same age aren't necessarily making the same wage between male and female. That said, I mean, once again, I think as long as you're if you're interested in bringing women into the workforce, then this is just something that you address. And I think the jobs that get created and the skill sets that you're looking for have to warrant that, right? That it needs, if you value the things that a woman's bringing to the table, then it's part of the job. And that's, you're going to go after more women for that. You're going to live with other skill deficiency or experience gaps as a result of that. Motherhood is not a bad thing. It's a great thing.
Yeah, I'll add too, there's sometimes in recruiting, there's also individuals that have 5-year agreements for the service. And I would say, I'm never going to say, oh, that stinks that you have to go somewhere for 4 weeks out of the year to help, our country. I want to respect it and understand that it's a part of their life and that sort of thing, and not judge them against that. And, we do have many females that have taken time off and returned back to business. The one thing I will say is, I think you also have to understand that, especially with the first child, when they come back, it's there's a different work-life balance demand as well. And so you can't just say, yes, you get this time off and then welcome back, as if nothing happened. Certainly, as we see today with schooling at home and everything else, there's other accommodations and considerations that need to be considered for all genders and races and so forth.
Rich, are you guys looking at any of the, some of the things that on the construction side, I know that Nancy and I've been looking at as far as exoskeleton stuff and, just different use of prefabrication to allow women to have more 8 to 5 as opposed to having to work off hours and things along those lines. Are you guys doing any of that on the IT infrastructure side?
Chris, that was for me.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious as far as where the IT infrastructure space is at. I know it's one of the things that we were trying to do on the construction side, but just kind of curious inside the data hall.
So when I think of IT, that's outside my wheelhouse. It's our, it's on the ETX side. So Dan Turinian, my ex-VP, handles that. But when I think of just specifically in the data center space, and more specifically, our smart hands teams, I'm trying to think about how I apply what you just asked to that space. So
yeah, smart hands it wouldn't really apply to, because that's shift based anyways, right? So already set up with predefined work hours. It's been one of the challenges we've had on construction sites is, how do you get more women into a construction site if you don't have hours that you can maintain and define well and things along those lines, if they're getting kids off to school. And we've been focused on prefabrication, a lot of prefabrication, focused on utilizing different tools and things. But anyways, I know it definitely holds back some of the trades, from a female perspective.
It's a really good point. And that, again, maybe that's something that we have to put on our agenda to think through, is that kind of thing. And someone asked about that in the chat, I think, about flexible work hours, and that's the kind of thing that ties into, as you said, you have a young family and such. Definitely. Michelle, I think there was a question about bias. Do you want to get on that one?
Which one's about bias? I was going to go in order here.
Oh, that's fine. You can go in order. I'm just saying you're saying two different ones.
I'm looking at chat and the Q&A, so I'm going back and forth. But actually, I'm going to ask this next one here, since we were talking about your family as well. It says, do you have any daughters, and what advice would you give them on their career journey? I know at least one person on this call has daughters.
So I'll take that first. Wish I had a daughter. I have 4 boys.
Mm.
Only do boys. My wife and I kept trying, obviously. Um, but so what advice I give my sons? It would be the same to my daughter. So it's again to have a great work ethic, to be accountable. I tell my sons that I think the younger generation thinks that it's not important to stay at a company or within a role for any time. They're job hoppers. They go 3, 4, 5 jobs a year, um, and I just tell them it's really important to develop that tenure and show people that they can depend on you, they can trust you. Yeah, so
So my kiddo's now at University of Texas, and she's now a sophomore. So she's in the civil engineering program, and you know, by a lot of bias exists at the university level. One of the grand ironies is you introduce yourself by your preferred personal pronoun and then get discriminated against by your Eastern engineering professor. And I think it was about her third weekend, she called me
Oh my
crying
gosh.
and wanted to quit, and she's like, Dad, they're smarter than me. You know, nobody's like me in here. And she's a blonde haired sorority girl at University of Texas and got discriminated against for wearing a sorority shirt. And this happens. And the advice that I had as father was, okay, well, kiddo, tell me how many of those kids are in a sorority or a fraternity? Well, none. How many of them know how to speak, in public? None. How many of them can play golf or go do this or, dance or have a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever? So it's about getting through these things. And the barriers are that so many times inside of at least the education system is, well, you have to be this A student. You don't have to be an A student. I mean, if you look at what's really being successful out there, it's not usually A students. I was a C student in my major. That doesn't mean I was dumb. It doesn't mean I just had other interests as well. And so, you can get through these things. And I think there needs to be more encouragement around those elements. And, at least for our university systems, I think they really need to look themselves in the eye as far as where the lip service is around bias and then what they actually do in the classroom with these tenured professors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great point.
So I'll round it out. I think I get the crown. I have 2 daughters. And it's interesting. So they're young enough that I have all these interesting things going through my head about what they'll be and what their interests are. But I will tell you, I think that I have 2 different levels or 2 different very personality styles. And so it'll be interesting to see as they go off to college or put themselves in an environment that's more career minded, how they do and react and choose where they want to be. I would say that their Lego mansion that they've built over the last 4 weeks in quarantine is pretty impressive. So I think there's a bright future there. And so I don't know that I'll have engineers or that I'll have people related to the field that I kind of coincidentally fell into. But I do think that continuing to push creativity and an open mind and the confidence and that that they can achieve many things. To Chris's point, I think I'll have a C student and probably an A student based on where we're at 2nd and 4th grade, but we'll see when we get there.
Here's a good,
That's awesome.
that's a follow-up to that is, do you think that female gender being willing to admit to an audience that they don't know is a strength or a detriment?
Strength. I don't care whether you're male or female, it's a strength. And by the way, if you're in an organization that's a detriment, quit.
Yeah, I will.
Boom.
I'm only going to temper it slightly because I had to recently tell an individual who has been trusted by the leaders of a large organization to deliver on a very mission critical project that I totally respect when you don't know the answer and you got to come back. but you got to be careful how and when you say it to make sure your credibility isn't damaged. And so that's my opinion of it is, in this case, he was just very, oh, I have no idea. I haven't seen that in the drawings yet. Well, you are challenged to be the guy that does know and has the information. And so just say it a little differently was my advice. But Michelle, is that because someone suggests that generally speaking, females are more likely to admit they don't know than men? Or Julie, I don't know if there's any research on that.
Probably tied to the confidence factor as well, right?
Yeah.
I'm afraid to say they don't know. Mm-hmm.
Right. Well,
Rich,
yeah,
I don't know about you, but the most confident people I know have no problem with saying, I'm not sure. I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, I agree.
well, it's just like, you know, they say men won't ask directions, you know, that they don't want to demonstrate that they don't know something, because then it kind of like lowers their stature to other men in particular. And so there was a funny video that was made like that. They went in a city and asked different people for directions to some site that doesn't exist. And these men, you can see on their face, they didn't know. They kind of had that look, and then they go, well, go down. They start giving them directions like over and over again. It was just ludicrous, but it was because they weren't willing to say, well, actually, I don't know where that is, you know, because it doesn't exist. But it proved the point.
I do agree with Chris, though, that people that are confident they know they won't lose credibility by saying they don't know. And it's more people that are trying to make up for it sometimes, that are very uncomfortable and have to talk their way through
Yeah.
an answer.
And then they're driving into a ditch the next thing, you know?
Yeah, the proverbial ditch.
Yeah, back to the ditch.
Yeah.
And so I found the other question you were referring to, Julie. So the one about biases, what advice would you give a woman who's experiencing a gender bias in her workplace right now, either in terms of from her peers or from leadership?
Yeah, that's a tough question, but I thought maybe it's an important thing to think through.
The first thing that comes to mind is having a network of trust as far as you can. And you know, I hear mixed results or feedback on having intentional professional female networks within an organization. So we have one at Holder. There's a group that is solely focused on making sure that there's interconnection and networking of females. And you know, for some it's not for them, but the great thing is that they're offered it. And I think if you have a network and you have someone you can call, I would definitely advise to call someone within your network that you trust to have a conversation about. But I would also say that I would immediately expect that someone on any of my projects would come to me, and I would hope that I've built that trust where they're comfortable coming to me. But if they've tried to make a comment in the past and it had been ignored, then clearly the individual may learn that is not the route to go, and then it's frustrating. So I would then pass that to Rich, because then he has the solution.
No, I mean, I would add to that, Eli. I agree. It's really a tough question. I think it's even tougher if it's your manager, your direct manager. You know, how do you handle that? It's even more difficult because it's, you know, diversity and inclusion is in our DNA. It's something that we talk about, again, from the top down every single day, and it's just it's not tolerated.
Yeah, I'll bring it back to a point I made earlier, that unaware bias is the dangerous thing out there. Self-aware bias is a wonderfully powerful thing. And what oftentimes happens, once again, let's throw the misogynist out the window, okay, literally or figuratively, depending upon what floor we're on. You know, I think taking the misogynist out of it, most of the bias that occurs is unaware bias. And the way that you get through that, at least from a Compass perspective, is, you know, the concept of trying to understand that fundamental attribution error, which is where you're judging somebody on their actions, but you judge yourself on your intent. and our goal inside of our organization and what our culture allows our folks to do is to try to figure out the other person's intent in a non-threatening way. So, hey, when you said that to me, I felt this way. Was that what you meant to do? And that helps bring out the unaware bias, because so many times, once again, we've committed to be a diverse company. We've got people from all over the world, India and Africa and this and that. Well, not all cultures are the same. Not all personalities are the same. And so many times it's on an unaware bias. So what I always encourage folks to do, and especially women, is to try to be vulnerable enough to say, hey, this is the story I'm telling myself. This is the way that I was thinking about it. Am I right? And be okay with what comes back, because many times you'll find that the non-misogynist, the guy will go, oh my God, I had no idea. Did I really say it that way? I didn't mean that. And you're helping to train someone who is not aware to become more aware.
I like that.
Yeah, I agree. We've got about 10 more minutes here, so I'm trying to get through. There's a couple more questions in here. I don't know if we'll get to them all, but do you feel that women are more likely to take big risks in the interest of innovation?
Our chief innovation officer is a woman, if that answers your question.
See, there you go.
Are they more likely to take risks? What's the question?
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Go for it.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think Eli's face is saying no.
Yeah,
What's he gonna say?
yeah, and I.
Eli, my read of the body language is saying no.
Yeah, and I say that because I have had discussions with, our female leaders, specifically out of interest of learning, and I think that the feedback I got was no, out of that fear of checking all the boxes. But I will say that the female leaders that have joined, the chief innovation officer for Compass, for example, the ones that have gotten to the positions they have obviously were making leaps and taking risks, and there's probably something to be learned with the others within the organization to learn from that behavior.
Yes.
No, I was just going to say, Michelle, to add to that, I think it depends on what your strategic direction is, from so in our case, from our CTO down. I sat in a meeting where I had two women senior managers, and I was going through our 3-year kind of data center strategy. And I got through my slide deck, and then they both asked, well, I didn't see anything in your deck that says we're going to be out of data centers in public cloud by the end of 2023. And I said, it was a great question, and they challenged me because they knew that it's our CTO's, again, strategic direction to move more and more workloads to the cloud. And there's significant benefits from scale, et cetera. But they challenged me on that, and it caught me a little off guard. But I said, well, it's not in there because that's not our goal to be 100% out. I know certain workloads will need to get there to get us to, our 1 billion transactions per year, but it's still going to take an on-prem presence in addition to what we're moving to cloud to make that happen.
It's always the observational questions, right? There's just huge value in them.
Right.
This next one's really interesting because I can relate to this. It just makes a comment about, I know most women who've joined the industry because they get along with guys better and they don't want to work with all women. So, there is this factor of all the drama that comes with working with all women, right? So some people may have joined this industry because there's more men in it, right? Do you think that creates any sort of unstated competitiveness between the women within your organization, though? Like, if there's not as many women as men, is it competitive between the women? If that makes sense.
I think the culture of the company is going to dictate that. If you have a culture that
Mm-hmm.
that allows eating your young, like that's going to happen in those types of environments. And I think if you have a culture that really doesn't tolerate that kind of stuff, it's I don't think it's going to be a big problem. That's why you see so many big companies that just don't have that type of issue. So that's at least my personal opinion. It's culturally based at the company level. It's, in my opinion.
I would add that, you know, we, as an predominantly organic growth company, we encourage people to go take their boss's job, you know, and so to have a level of competitiveness. I remember when I was young, I had a vice president tell me something to the tune of, you know, to want and to go after and to achieve something that seemed almost like, you know, like people eating their young type of mentality. But the reality was that we want people that are driven. And so if a female looks at representation on the board, for example, if they say, wow, there's only 2 females on the board of directors of 12, to want that and to have a competitive drive over that, or to want to be the third, because it's always only been 2, I'm going to be the third. I think there's some positive in that, as long as it's healthy and as long as there's, you know, good organizational interest in why that is there.
Yeah, so last question before we wrap up here, but it's been known there's a high percentage of women that leave this industry in particular. Do you have any programs in place maybe to retain women who are already in this industry?
Yeah, I can take that first.
Yeah.
So again, you know, it's in PayPal's DNA from a diversity inclusion perspective, and it's something that, again, our CEO preaches every day. We have multiple employee resource groups that serve as a collective voice and a key partner in driving commitment to inclusion and culture. One of those groups is called Unity. It's a PayPal affinity group of both women and men working together to create opportunities for women at PayPal, and it's focused on gender equality and gender balance. The real mission, though, is to help women thrive and provide growth opportunities and help the next generation explore the world of technology.
Yeah, I would say, at least in my experience, the women are highly recruited and sought after because they're rare in our space. You know, we have a very difficult time prying away women from other roles or companies or things like that. So, you know, for us, yeah, is there a formal program in place? You know, comp is a big component of things, but so's work-life balance, so's, you know, other types of benefits that we would bring into play to make sure that we can attract the top talent that we want from a female perspective.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to what Rich and Chris said is a good feeling of self-worth within the organization retains people, I think. And so as long as we, you know, like you said, compensation and all those other things are there, if they feel like it's a place to call home and to build a career, they're going to stay. And I think it's our mission, whether it's a specific effort, it's our mission to do that with all of our people. And so hopefully, I want to go back and check that stat now, because I'm not sure we have higher than normal retention with females, but it's something to look into.
I love that.
Yeah.
Chuck, can I ask one last question?
Beth had a great point too, that, you know, you could just join WIMCO, because that's kind of what we're here for. So for
there you go.
Want to join WIMCO, we're, you know, support community of other women that are in the same industry, right? So
it's very important.
I love that. Awesome. Well, can I ask one last quick question of our panelists? And that is from WIMCO, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given? And let's start at the top, Eli, Chris, and round out with Rich.
Starting with me, huh? Rich, jump in if you think of something. I want it to be meaningful. I have a lot of things that come to mind, but for this group,
Best advice I've been given my entire career is to always be firm, fair, and consistent, to be genuine, sincere, and treat others like you want to be treated, period.
the
I love
funny
that.
thing is I was going to say treat others like you want to be treated, and now that Rich said it, I can't. So that didn't help me one bit. But what I will say is, I think anyone that's worked with me, and I know some names on the attendee list, um, my goal has always been to have a good balance of being a steward for my client, but respecting and treating trades the way they should be treated. And so it has been a balance, and it was taught for me very early on in my career to just treat all aspects of the business, whether someone's digging a trench, I think it was Rich maybe that said that, or whether they're on the board of directors for the client that I'm working for.
Right. That's great. Chris, my
Just
man.
do everything that you're doing with the concept that you're leaving a legacy.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Well, you guys are leaving an incredible legacy. What a great way to wrap us up here. And, you know, all three of you are such great leaders. And, you know, I'm so glad that we got to have this important conversation today. And I'm sure it sparked a lot of really usable ideas that people in our audience can go out and enact in their companies. And thank you so much for your openness, your willingness to really have a difficult conversation here. And I'm sure the audience appreciates that. And I know I do. And thank you, WIMCO, for having all of us and hosting this today.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
everyone.
I'm sure I didn't answer all of the questions the way everyone had hoped. So Michelle's free to give out my email if anyone has a follow-up. So
Thank
appreciate
you.
everyone that
Thank
attended.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks for being here today. Appreciate y'all.